Reflecting on a colleague's life after losing a spouse. After observing a colleague's life following the loss of their spouse, my wife and I decided on how we would live when only one of us is left in our later years. When the time comes and one of us is gone, how will you spend the rest of your life alone? Many people would say, when that time comes, of course, I'll rely on my children. I'll live with them and let them take care of me. Although this is the expected outcome of raising children to support you in old age, it is not always a guaranteed or practical option. An elderly man in his 70s, Mr. One, shared his observations and revealed a different plan for his later years, one that felt both liberating and wise. A story from Mr. One. My name is Wen Xiangming. I'm 73 years old, and my wife is 71. We are both ordinary retired workers. My pension is 4,100 yuan, and my wife's is 3,500 yuan. We own a car and a 100-square-meter apartment. We have a son and a daughter, both of whom are doing relatively well. Our daughter married into a family in the provincial capital, where our son-in-law runs a small business and is doing quite well. Our son studied at a university in a nearby city and stayed there after graduation, securing a job at a state-owned enterprise and establishing a family. Since they started working, they haven't caused us much worry. When our daughter got married, we didn't ask for a dowry, nor did she demand a dowry from us. When our son got married, he paid for the wedding himself. We only contributed a few thousand yuan as a wedding gift. When our grandson was born, our son didn't ask us to help raise him. When they bought a house, they didn't ask us for money either. Overall, they have been very filial since they started working, never troubling us, and allowing my wife and me to live peacefully. Seeing such filial children, my wife and I were always comforted and didn't think much about the future. We always felt that no matter how difficult things got, we still had our children as a safety net. So, when it came to discussing what to do when only one of us was left in our later years, our plan after retirement was simple. If one of us passed away, the remaining person would go live with our children. We would sell the house and live off our savings with our children's support. After all, the purpose of raising children is to ensure they can care for you in old age. Our children are so filial, and we would have significant savings. Surely, life in our later years would be good. This was the most comforting plan my wife and I had in mind. However, after visiting an old colleague who had lost his spouse years ago, we dared not think this way anymore. I had a colleague, Old Song, with whom I worked for nearly 20 years. He is 2 years older than me and receives over 5,000 yuan a month in pension. In the past, Old Song and his wife lived similarly to us. They lived alone as a couple after their only son got married and moved out. 6 years ago, Old Song's wife passed away due to illness, and he sold their house and moved to the provincial capital to live with his son. Because of the distance and Old Song's unfamiliarity with smartphones, we gradually lost contact. My wife and I assumed that Old Song must have been enjoying life with his son, which is why he forgot about us old colleagues. However, 2 years ago, another colleague who was close to Old Song suddenly told us that Old Song had returned and was living a very miserable life, renting a relative's old house and living alone. Hearing this, I was shocked. How could Old Song, who had a higher pension and went to live with his son, end up living so miserably? My wife and I went to visit Old Song to understand his situation, and we found out that his life with his son had not been smooth. At first, his son and daughter-in-law were very respectful and attentive, not asking him to do any chores. But after some time, they started to become impatient with him, complaining about his hygiene and saying he didn't understand how to be considerate of young people. They gradually handed over more and more household chores to him, expecting him to buy groceries, cook, wash clothes, clean the house, and even pick up and drop off his grandson from school. Sometimes, they even asked him to run errands for them, like picking up packages or delivering items. While it's okay for the elderly to help out a little, Old Song's son and daughter-in-law kept taking advantage of him. When Old Song first moved in, he handed over the money from the sale of his old house to his son. But after his son bought a new house and car, he continued to indirectly ask Old Song for money, asking him to cover living expenses and pay for his grandson's various school fees. This turned Old Song into a household servant who contributed both money and labor, often facing scolding from his son and daughter-in-law. On one hot afternoon in the 6th year of living with his son, Old Song dropped off his grandson at school and didn't return home. He decided to go to a game room to play cards, but on his way, he suffered from heat stroke while riding his electric bike and crashed into the roadside. Luckily, passers-by took him to the hospital in time, saving his life. However, he suffered a leg fracture, which kept him bedridden for more than 3 months. During his recovery, Old Song experienced deep heartache. Instead of showing concern, his son and daughter-in-law blamed him for his accident, saying that if he hadn't been wandering around at noon, he wouldn't have suffered heat stroke and caused them trouble by requiring their care. After enduring their cold treatment for 3 months, Old Song finally decided to return to his hometown. But since he had sold his house, he had no choice but to rent a relative's small apartment. The apartment was small, only about 60 square meters with 2 bedrooms, which was sufficient for Old Song's needs. But seeing how Old Song's life had turned out, my wife and I were deeply moved. We had always believed that living with our children in our later years would bring us happiness, but after witnessing Old Song's situation, we no longer dare to think that way. After visiting Old Song, my wife and I made a new plan for the rest of our lives. If one of us passes away, the other will live alone. 1. Not moving in with our children. Our children are very filial, but when the time comes that only one of us is left, we won't move in with them. Even if they ask us to, we won't go. This is not about being difficult. We've come to understand that no matter how filial children are, living together can turn into a disaster. As long as the elderly can still help out, everything is fine. But once they can no longer help, they become a burden, and life becomes difficult. 2. No remarriage or cohabitation. Nowadays, many elderly people consider remarrying or cohabiting after becoming single again, believing that having a companion is necessary for a better later life. But we don't think that way. Especially now that we are both over 70, whoever is left is no longer young. Although remarriage or cohabitation might bring happiness and companionship, these are temporary. At our age, death is an ever-present risk, like a time bomb that could go off at any moment. We've already experienced one separation due to death, so why go through that again? It's not worth it, especially when most remarriages at this age are superficial, often motivated by ulterior motives. 3. Holding on to our money and property. If one of us passes away, we've agreed to hold on to our money and property. We won't hand over our savings and assets to our children. This isn't about being cold-hearted. It's about realizing that when you're truly alone in your later years, money and property are your best support. As the old saying in Guangdong goes, a close hand is better than a distant son. No matter how filial your children are, it's better to have the means to support yourself in old age. 4. Planning our own retirement in phases. If we choose to support ourselves in old age without relying on our children or remarrying, we've made the following plan. First, while we're still able to care for ourselves, we'll live alone. We have our pensions and a place to live. If we fall ill, we have medical insurance to cover the costs. Next, when our health starts to decline and we can no longer take care of ourselves, we'll see if we have enough money to hire a caregiver. If we can't afford one, we'll sell our house and use the proceeds to find better retirement options. Our apartment is old but still worth over 1,000,000 yuan. We don't care if the value increases in the future. Even at its current value, it's enough to ensure a good retirement. With that money, we could buy a smaller 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs for 500,000 yuan, and use the remaining 500,000 yuan to hire a caregiver. Alternatively, we could skip buying another apartment and use the entire million yuan to pay for a quality nursing home. Finally, whether we hire a caregiver or move into a nursing home, if our health deteriorates to the point where we can no longer care for ourselves or are at the end stage of an illness, we've agreed to forego any life-extending treatments. We won't live in hospitals. We want to pass away in a place where we can still live in comfort and dignity. This is our plan for the rest of our lives if we are left alone in old age. My wife and I have carefully considered and planned this out. Our plan is not about having children for old age care. Instead, it's about being independent, relying on our own strength to live out our later years without becoming a burden to our children. I think this is the most intelligent way to live in old age. Conclusion: the importance of independence in old age. The experience of Mr. Wan and his wife highlights the importance of self-reliance and careful planning in old age. While filial children are a blessing, it is crucial to prepare for the possibility of living alone and not to rely solely on children for support. Financial independence, practical living arrangements, and the ability to make decisions about one's care are essential for maintaining dignity and quality of life in later years.